Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about fundamentals of solar and concepts that are important to understand. That's a series we have. We have several videos already in this series. So take a look if you are interested in understanding fundamentals of solar. In this video we will talk about wattage and peak wattage and kilowatt hours. Start with watt and peak watt. When you look on a solar panel, for example this one in Lazada, the specification that you see is the wattage here, which is the same as peak wattage. So what is peak wattage? Peak wattage is the maximum that the panel can produce in optimal conditions. So when the sun is in the optimal angle in the middle of the day without any clouds, this panel is able to output 360 watts. Okay, that goes into the inverter. You have some loss in cables and you have some loss inside the inverter. So that's why they call the output the peak wattage, because after all this loss in the cables and the inverter, the wattage that you are left with is not 360 watts. It's lower, depending on the system that you have. The better the system you have, the closer to the peak wattage you will have after the inverter. So you will have less loss. So that's the peak wattage. It's important to understand in a solar system, obviously you have clouds, you have non-optimal angles when the sun is going from east to west, etc. So a panel will almost never produce the peak wattage. It will almost always be lower. So that is why it's quite normal to see production on a 360 watts panel at around 300 and stuff like that, even lower if you have clouds, or a lot lower if you have clouds and rainy days and stuff like that. In the morning, obviously, you have much lower. So important concepts to understand. And some panels are obviously better at giving out wattage than others. So that's the main difference between different kinds of panels. It's the peak wattage. So for example, this one that we use a lot, very high quality. It's Chinese, but I think the difference between Chinese and European produced and American produced is getting smaller and smaller, if there is any difference at all anymore. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but if you are worried, then we can obviously handle that too with other products. But this is a very good Chinese product from the brand called Longi. And here you see the wattage. Let's see. You see they have this panel in 350, 395 and 400, and now it's up to 440. That's the latest we use. That's also peak wattage. Okay, so let's now talk about kilowatt hours. Kilowatt is, as most people know, that's just the same as saying 1000 watt. So we may as well say we're going to talk about watt hours. That's fine also, it doesn't matter, it's the same meaning. But we often speak of it in kilowatt hours, because when you talk about watt hours, you can get a lot of it. So for example, let's say you have 50 kilowatt hours. It's very cumbersome to say 50,000 watt hours. So that's why we instead say 50 kilowatt hours. So that's why we use the concept kilowatt hours. Let's say that a panel is able to produce over a full hour 400 watts. So that over that 1 hour, that means 0.4 kilowatt hours. Okay, that's 400 watt over an hour. So kilowatt hour is just a measurement of wattage over time, measured in this case in an hour. Okay, that's important, because when you measure electricity, you obviously have to have a measurement over time, because if not, electricity will go up and down. So if you don't have a measurement over time, you have no idea what you are doing. Because if you just say wattage, you are only talking about the specific point in time. Let's say for an air condition, if it's rated at 1000 watts, that's a specific point in time when it uses 1000 watts. Usually that would be exactly when it's starting up. It will draw that. It could draw even more. Then as it starts to work and work less heavily, it will create an average that is lower because it doesn't need as much electricity over time. So let's say it was using 1000 the first the first half hour, and then 500 in the last hour. So then the kilowatt hour is going to be 750. It's going to produce, 0.75. Okay, 0.75 kilowatt hour will that need to run over 1 hour. So it's just a measurement of electricity used over time. But it's used a lot in solar observation and stuff like that. So when you look at the measure, if you have a system, you look at how much the system has produced in a day, it will always say kilowatt hour. So, because it's very handy. Also because the PEA and MEA, they will give you a bill based on kilowatt hour. So it will say, for example, you have 400 kilowatt hour the last month. And then also most people know the price that they pay per kilowatt hour. It can vary depending a little bit on your system. We can get back to that later. But on average, it's maybe 4.5, something like that. So you take 400 times 4.5. So you get like 1700 or something like that. So then you know the bill, if you know the kilowatt hour. Then you also know, if you know how much electricity your system has produced, you also know the savings that you have made. If your system is on grid, if you are using all the electricity that the solar system has used.